Welcome back. It's time for us to try and wrap up Unit 3. And in terms of wrapping up Unit 3, we want to have a look at the concept of the multiplier effect and also the accelerator effect. To fully understand what is happening here within the economy, we want to go back to our circular flow model. And the key thing to remember here is that in the basic model, we are actually looking at the interplay or the interaction between households and firms. We are saying that the household has the factors of production, which are going to be things like labor, land, capital, and enterprise. And these are going to be made available to the firms so that the firms can produce goods and services. In exchange for making use of these factors of production, the firms are going to provide factor income to the household, and the factor incomes are going to be realized through wages, rent, interest, and profits. So that's our basic model. We have said, though, that there are limitations of the basic model because it does not include things like our interaction with our trading partners, the rest of the world. We don't also account for interventions by financial institutions. And we also do not include the role of government. So we can therefore expand this basic model to include government, to include financial institutions, and to include the interactions with our trading partners. And this leads us to the concept of injections and leakages. Remember, if government is going to be doing spending, then that's an injection into the economy. So this is money that is coming into the system, which is different from the money which has been created through factor income. We're also saying that money might be made available for investment by the financial institutions. And we are saying in terms of exports, people outside of our country who are actually buying our stuff, then these are going to be injections into the system. And just note the arrows, because the direction of the arrows will indicate what are injections on this particular diagram. We also note that there can also be some leakages or withdrawals. So, for example, government might be asking for taxes that's going to take money away from the system or away from the circular flow. People might choose to save. That takes money away from the circular flow. And people might also choose to be buying imports, which are foreign goods. That also takes away money from the circular flow. Now, all of this becomes important as we talk about the multiplier impact and the accelerator impact. So let's start out this discussion then by, first of all, having a look at a formula where we're saying that the change in injections implies that there's going to be a change in national income, which implies that there is going to then be a change in investment. Please note that when we're talking about injections, as we would have mentioned earlier, so remember J is injections, we're talking about investment, we're talking about government spending, and we're talking about money that is coming into the country via exports. So I want you to keep that in mind as you think about injections. By the way, just remember this is J. All right, so what is all of this saying? Well, let's start with the multiplier effect. So the multiplier effect is saying whenever there are injections, this will create a ripple effect of business activity. So this creates a ripple effect of business activities such that the total activity is greater than the initial activity. And remember, we're talking in terms of things which are being done within the economy, goods and services being produced, etc. So whenever there are injections, this creates this kind of ripple effect in terms of the business cycle, the business activities. And what the multiplier does is it provides us with a measure of quantifying how huge this activity is. So let's just add that. So the multiplier quantifies the extent of the activity. So there's a formula that guides what is happening here. And the formula says that, well, the change in national income is going to be equal to some factor K times the change in injections. So if we know the amount of injections and we know the change in national income, then we can compute what the multiplier is going to be. So just by transposing or rearranging, so we want to have K on one side, then we get the change in Y over the change in J is equal to K. So if we write it another way, just put the K in front, then we know that K is equal to the change in Y over the change in J. Remember, change in Y is the change in national income. The change is in J is the change in injections. Now, over time, what happens in the economy? Over time in the economy, we assume that income is going to be equal to expenditure. So everything that is earned is going to be spent back on goods and services. We also assume that over time, injections are going to be equal to withdrawals. So new money that enters into the system, which is not as a result of factor income, is going to be equal to the amount of money that leaves the system. Remember, withdrawals are the same thing as leakages. So we're talking about savings, we're talking about taxes, and we're talking about imports, STM. Those are the withdrawals. So over time, because the injections is going to be equal to the withdrawals, then we know that J is going to be equal to W. Hence, we can replace the change in J with the change in W. So another way in which we can compute the factor K, the multiplier, is going to be by looking at the change in Y, which is the change in national income, over the change in withdrawals or leakages. Now, all of this leads us to another important concept, which we are going to call the marginal propensity So it's called marginal propensities. And what this is actually looking at is out of each dollar earned, well, extra dollar earned. So let me just put in the extra. Out of each extra dollar earned, how is this allocated? So each time somebody earns an extra dollar, how is it allocated? This is known as marginal propensity. And the theory says that some of this money is going to go into consumption. And when we talk about consumption, we're talking about consumption of domestic products. So this is domestic consumption. So out of each dollar, extra dollar that you earn, some of the money is going to go towards purchasing domestic goods. But some is also going to go towards foreign consumption. So we want to buy things from Amazon and Temu, etc. However, we also have to include that some of this might go towards taxes. So this is the marginal propensity to taxes. In other words, how much out of the dollar goes to the government. So government tax. And then there's going to be some of this, which is going to go into savings. So household savings. So because all of this tells us how a dollar is going to be allocated, then when we sum up everything here, then it should give us 1. So the marginal propensity to consume domestic products plus the marginal propensity to purchase things which are external plus the marginal propensity to pay taxes plus the marginal propensity to save is going to be equal to 1. Now, if we look at these, we have savings, we have tax, we have imports. This matches back to withdrawals or leakages. So we can therefore say that this part of the equation is talking about the leakages or the withdrawals. We can Now do some juggling in terms of this equation. If we transpose, then we end up with the marginal propensity to purchase imports plus the marginal propensity to pay the tax plus the marginal propensity to save is equal to 1 minus the marginal propensity to consume. Remember, this is consuming domestic products. Now, all of this is important because it gives us another measure of computing K. Because K can also be computed as 1 over 1 minus the marginal propensity to consume, or it can be written as 1 over the marginal propensity to purchase imports plus marginal propensity to pay tax plus marginal propensity to save. So these are all different ways in which we can compute K, or that multiplier that occurs within the economy. And we will do an example so that we can consolidate everything that we are discussing here. Now, just to move on quickly to the accelerator concept. If we remember, the change in injections is going to drive a change in national income. So when more money, when money comes into the system, then it means that incomes are going to rise or be greater. And this change in income will tend to drive a change in investment. When people have more money, then what this does is that it signals to the business that there is a greater demand for goods and services, and as such, the firms, the businesses are then going to now be more compelled to invest in their machinery, to invest in labor, so that they can produce more goods and services, so that they can offer these to the consumers within the society. So we don't need to talk about the accelerator principle. And the accelerator principle pretty much says that the investments which are going to be incurred within the economy will generate a ripple effect of business activities which will generate a larger value than the initial investment. So whenever people invest within the economy, so businesses are going to expand, so they are going to buy machinery and so on to support their productive capabilities, then what this does, similar to what happens in the multiplier effect, is that there's going to be a ripple effect on business activities. And these activities in both cases can span multiple periods. And what will happen, therefore, is that you will end up generating a much larger value than what was initially invested into the system. So both the multiplier principle and the accelerator principle are saying that the money that is coming into the system is going to generate a series of activities that will work together to create more value within the economy. Now, in terms of the formula for this, there is something known as the net induced income. So that is I subscript T is equal to some factor V times the change in national income, change in Y. So these are the two formulas that we will be using as we discuss our example so that we can see the interplay between both of them and see how they both impact the kind of value that is created within the society based on these interventions. So I stop here in terms of going through the theory, and in the next recording, I'll now do an example that kind of solidifies all of these formulas that we have just looked at. As you can see, the formulas are not difficult. They are basic formulas. So once we now see it live in an example, then it will consolidate all of the knowledge and make it easy to appreciate. So stay tuned for the next recording.